Welcome back, vinyl community. Reggae spotlight time again. Group called the Wailing Souls in the mix today. 7-inch single style here. Brimstone and fire burn them. But if you call on Jah, he will hear you. Distinctive lead vocals of Winston "Pipe" Matthews, leader of the group. Very heartfelt, somewhat rural flavored. The rural reggae has a gentler, more reflective tone to it, but still righteous. Somewhat gospel flavored here. This is a fairly rare single, obscure, credited not as the Wailing Souls, but as Ataras, produced by the great Joe Higgs here. This is a reissue on the Pressure Sounds label out of the UK. This originally came out in the early 1970s, I believe. The Wailing Souls were one of those groups who were credited under various names for a time there before settling on their most well-known identity. They were variously known as Pipe and the Pipers, Ataras, the Classics, but that one was produced by Joe Higgs, the great Joe Higgs, whose informal music classes in his Trenchtown yard also tutored up-and-coming stars like Bob Marley and the Wailers and many others, and the future members of the Wailing Souls were in that school of students. The group had started out, Winston "Pipe" Matthews had been a member of a group called the Schoolboys, which recorded for Prince Buster. By 1966, he'd formed a group called the Renegades, joined by Lloyd "Bread" McDonald, and the two of these would be the core of the Wailing Souls forever after. To round out the trio, they were joined by Buddy Hay. By 1968, they had moved to Studio One Records, Cox and Dodds Studio One, as the Renegades, where they recorded Mr. Fire Coal Man, many other classics, sometimes credited as the Classics. One of their tunes appears on this compilation that came out for Record Store Day a year or so ago, Natural High, and that is a tune called Got to Be Cool by the Classics, which is the Wailing Souls. Also credited as the Wailing Souls here. I think it originally came out credited to the Renegades. A classic tune called Row Fisherman Row appeared on Best of Studio One on Heartbeat Records out of the US in the early 80s. One of the first compilations to begin representing the Studio One catalog for a more modern generation of listener. The Wailing Souls' time at Studio One produced many classic tunes, Mr. Fire Coal Man being one of the most redone, reversioned. They were finally collected in a LP, debut LP, simply called The Wailing Souls. In typical Studio One fashion, this LP appeared a few years after the tunes had originally been recorded. Now, I actually have two versions of this LP. This one is on the standard black and white Studio One label. Classic LP, back out with it, Mr. Fire Coal Man, Row Fisherman Row, Real Rock. Oh, there's Got to Be Cool on there again. The Wailing Souls would often redo some of their older tunes in a different style, as many other Jamaican artists did. Now, the reason that prompted me to do this video at this time, I had a recent haul in an antique mall just down the road from me. I showed some of the finds from that in a regular vinyl finds video, but several of them were related to the Wailing Souls, so I thought I would spin those off into their own spotlight video. One of the key pieces I found in this collection was another copy of that debut album in absolutely almost mint condition. The Wailing Souls got this for a very cheap price, less than sticker price, and this version appears on the US yellow and red Studio One label. Why do I keep saying labor? Label. Too early in the morning, can't talk. So absolutely essential classic. This would be followed, I also have the CD version of that, Studio One CD, my original copy. Labor. That's coming out. They recorded a second LP for Studio One. Again, these LPs tended to come out a few years after the recordings had actually been made. Only have a CD copy of this. Wailing Souls, Soul and Power. Now this Antique Mall find, they had like a partial discography of the Wailing Souls there. A few of them I had already. These were upgrade copies as they look barely played in some cases. In one case I only had a reissue, so it was nice to grab the original. But yeah, I kept looking for Soul and Power. That second Studio One LP in the bins was not there. Disappointing. Following their time at Studio One, the Wailing Souls went through one of their periodic lineup changes. Buddy Hay left, was joined for a time by Joe Higgs, and then finally Higgs had to leave to go on tour with Jimmy Cliff, was replaced by Garth Dennis, who had been a founding member of the group Black Uhuru. Now Garth Dennis had earlier recorded a song called Slow Coach as a solo single, which appeared on the Sidna label, Slow Coach. This song would later be reworked and redone by the Wailing Souls as a group, and it would appear on an album called Wild Suspense, which was recorded at Channel One, self-produced. This would be, for many listeners, this would be the first LP by the Wailing Souls, as the Studio One LPs, while recorded earlier, had been released later. But this appeared in 1979. The Wailing Souls had started their own label called Massive, releasing a pair of singles which were very well released, Breda Gravelicious and Feel the Spirit, which prompted Island Records to release this LP with them, and it is an absolute classic set. From start to finish, Row Fisherman, Slow Coach, redone again in a new version, faster style, somewhat remixed here for an international audience, but an absolutely essential reggae classic. Also have that. This is my original CD copy, as put out in the 1990s by Island Records. While at Channel One, they were the Wailing Souls were putting out a furious rate of singles, some self-produced, as on the Wild Suspense LP, some produced by Jojo Hookum, owner of the Channel One studio, and backed by his house band, the Revolutionaries. These would be hard-hitting 7 and 12-inch singles with dub versions. They were nicely collected by Pressure Sounds on this compilation called Wailing Souls at Channel One. Compiled all from singles. Many classic sides: War, Joy Within Your Heart, Jaja Give Us Life to Live, Things in Time. Many classic songs recorded at Channel One. Almost too many to keep track of for a group that maybe is not that well known to the general public. Here's one of their singles here. If I can read the label. Things in Time here on the Channel One Disco Mix label. Hopefully that shows up. Also have Joy Within Your Heart on the Well Charged label, another Channel One imprint. These would all be Jojo Hookum productions. Yet another Channel One label. Hitbound, 12-inch single, X-Sound System copy I picked up a while back, and this is War with Ranking Trevor on the DJ bit. I'd play some of these for you, but they all seem to be blocked by YouTube. 12-inch single. Following their time recording for themselves and for Jojo Hookum, the Wailing Souls moved on in the early 80s to producer Henry Junjo Laws, then absolutely on fire with releasing a floodgate of classic singles and LPs with various artists, recorded at Channel One and now backed by the Roots Radix, which had superseded the Revolutionaries as the house band of the moment, of the time. And for Junjo Laws, the Wailing Souls produced another absolute classic, Firehouse Rock. And these would now appear on the Greensleeves label, which Junjo Laws had a connection with in the UK. Greensleeves was emerging as the key label in the crucial UK market, and the Wailing Souls would release a series of records on there, produced by Junjo Laws. Absolutely essential classic here with the title track Being somewhat of an example of black humor, Waterhouse is an area of Kingston, Jamaica, plagued by gun violence. So in a bit of a twist, they would call it Firehouse. So the Wailing Souls tribute, Firehouse rock. Some call it Waterhouse, a firehouse rock. Deeply spiritual side, one of their finest, absolute finest moment, and a crucial LP. Again, straight up classic. Also or rather around the same time, for producer Linval Thompson, who was somewhat of a rival to Junjo Laws, Wailing came out. This was another Antique Mall find I did not have before. This appeared on the Jaw Guidance label, somewhat of a rarer, less well-known LP by the Wailing Souls. Again recorded at Channel 1, mixed at King Tubby's, produced by Linval Thompson, and with dub mixer Scientist at the controls. Presented showcase style, with most vocals followed by their dub versions, with Scientist taking it into a new level, new dimensions of dub. As I said, many singles released on the iconic Greensleeves label out of the UK with their colorful sleeves. This one is Firehouse Rock, 12-inch version. The Wailing Souls would come out with a second LP for Junjo Laws, Inch Pinchers. This is 1983 now. Nearly as good as Firehouse Rock. And this is also one I upgraded from the Antique Mall find. I only had a reissue of this. This is original, Greensleeves. Around the same time, Baby Come Rock would appear from Joe Gibbs. Somewhat confusingly, this repeats some of the tracks from Inch Pinchers, but not all of them. Typical Jamaican fashion. And this was another one from the Antique Mall Hall, Diamonds and Pearls, another Junjo Laws production. Series of hard-hitting 7 and 12-inch sides for Junjo, backed by the Roots Radix. And produced by Wailing Souls for On the Rocks, they would return to self-production. Another excellent LP by them. 1983 again, I believe. Yes, still on the Greensleeves label. In the early 80s, the Wailing Souls would start spending a lot of their time in the US. They released Stranded in 1984, still on Greensleeves. By this point, apparently they were stranded in LA at one point. They underwent another lineup shift with bringing on some new members, and still the core of Pipe Matthews and Brad McDonald as the only constant members. But they would keep coming out with more releases through the 80s. Lay It on the Line appeared in 1986. That was one I saw in the Antique Mall, but I didn't buy it the first time, went back to look for it again, could not find it. But in 1992, All Over the World appeared as the Wailing Souls began broadening their sound in the kind of post-Roots era as dancehall took over at home. This album would be nominated for a Grammy internationally, would lead to them being featured on the Cool Runnings soundtrack. They were the first reggae group to appear on The Tonight Show around this time. Big period for them. Live On would also appear in the mid-90s. Equality in 2000. And even in 2003, a third LP for Studio One came out. Square Deal. This was well received at the time. Don't hear too much about it these days. Indeterminate time when it was recorded, typical Studio One fashion. But another set for Studio One. And still with the duo of Pipe Matthews and Brad McDonald, who have continued as the Wailing Souls ever since, still active up to this time. One of the great reggae groups, not occasionally given their due. Maybe the name has got them confused with the Wailers internationally, but very, very consistent group. Many, many classic songs to their name. So that was my look at the Wailing Souls. Hope you enjoyed, and cheers, guys.